Hi everyone, this is Braden. I'm so happy to welcome you to today's episode. I just want to note that partway through there were some minor technical difficulties. There's a little bit of crackling with the guest's mic that sent him in and out for a little bit, but I promise you it will not last very long, so I hope you can stick with it. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Parent Teacher Conference podcast, Conversations on Raising Adults and Teens. I'm your host, Braden Bell, and I'm delighted to be here today with Dr. James DeVivo. Dr. DeVivo is a creative arts leader with over 25 years' experience in theater education, specializing in new play development, theater history, and playwriting programs for youth. He is dedicated to the roles of education programming in audience development and artistic programming in the classroom. Jim is the 7th through 12th grade theater teacher for Holmdel Township Schools, an adjunct professor in the program in educational theater at NYU, and a member of the New Jersey Thespians State Board of Directors, where he coordinates the annual New Jersey Thespian Playworks program. Jim has a long list of teaching credits at the college level and is very active in his field with published pieces in leading journals. He is also the author of the excellent Substack newsletter, The Young Artist's Guide. Jim holds PhD and MA degrees in educational theater from NYU and graduated magna cum laude with university honors from Niagara University with a dual major BFA in theater and English. He's married to Bridget DeVivo, director of the award-winning drama program at Oak Hill Academy. Together, they direct a troupe of 3 children and 1 pug. Jim is a thoughtful, compassionate teacher and incisive thinker. He's a passionate advocate for teens as people with thoughts, ideas, and dreams of their own. Indeed, Jim takes teens as seriously as anyone I have ever known. He thinks deeply about ways to help not only his own students, but young people everywhere, and connects education and the arts to real empowerment. The question, how can we help kids, lies at the hearts of all Jim does. It is something he asks constantly in any and every context. Jim is also a dear and longtime friend of mine. Dr. James DeVivo, welcome to the Parent Teacher Podcast.
Well, thank you, Dr. Braden Bell. It's great to be here with you, to see you again and to talk to you. I'm looking forward to it.
I won't bore our listeners with too much looking back, but Jim and I met, almost roughly about this time of year.
Yeah.
A long time ago in 1999, when we both showed up as new students at NYU. And in the years we were there, we were both poor college students. And I remember we found solace in the second floor of McDonald's on Broadway, where I think we could buy really cheap hamburgers and sometimes even French fries if we were lucky.
That's right. If we were lucky, that's right. You know what? When I defended the dissertation, that's where I went, was to
Did
that
you
McDonald's.
really?
I did. Yeah, I felt like I was starving, and I felt like that was the appropriate place to go.
Oh, Jim, I wish I would have known. I would have shown up. That was
You were there in spirit.
oh goodness. Well, it's great to see you, my friend.
You too.
Tell us a little bit about what you do, Jim. You do so much, but will you talk about your daily work? And then I know we have a couple topics we talked about, but I want everyone to
Sure.
get a sense of you.
Yeah, well, I am a theater teacher for middle school and high school. This will be my 7th year in the classroom, 7th consecutive year in the classroom. I actually did a year between the 2 stints in graduate school, teaching high school in Maryland. Between those classroom stints, I worked with a theater company in the education department, which is where I started doing a lot of that work with young playwrights. The company I was at was a new play development theater. Their education office did a lot of work devising pieces with kids, or teaching acting classes, or mostly doing writing, literary and performing arts workshops in schools across the state. But also had this New Jersey Young Playwrights Festival, which at the time had about, I don't know, 700 submissions that year, and it was a beast of a program that nobody wanted to. And so as the new young guy coming in, was kind of handed, a good 300 of them, and said, these need to be finished and mailed back. I fell in love with it. It was great. It was fascinating to see the stories, and um, get inside kids' minds. When they're writing, they're sharing so much of who they are and what they're thinking, and I don't think we often get to experience that even in a classroom working with kids so closely. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed over the last few years being in middle school and high school is that I now have students who are graduating this year who I started working with when they were in 8th grade, and then next year I'll have been with students for a full 6 years. So I know a lot of us, when we get the chance to work with students consecutively, over time, you get to know, the person and watch their development. And it's kind of like having your own children and seeing that. But it's really the first time I'm experiencing that with these students, and it's been great to get into that. Into all their mindset and their development and everything else. And I'm glad too that one of the things you said that I really thank you for was that idea of taking them seriously. Excuse me, taking them seriously. Something I found through all the research, it was a phrase that kept coming up, that the students who were involved in arts programs really felt most empowered or most seen, when a couple of them said specifically, I just was so in awe that professional adult actors were taking what I had to say and what I had done so seriously that they were willing to put it on stage. So I try to bring a lot of that to the classroom. I think some of what I do feels very traditional, with, the air quotes around it, but also trying to bring some of that aspect into it as well.
So, just so you all know, listeners, this is not going to be the next 30 minutes of us just swapping theater stories, although I won't promise that none of that will happen. But the reason I wanted Jim on the podcast is he's alluded to some of that is, first of all, he has a unique view. Very few educators work with children from grades 7 through 12. So he actually has a front seat in these very incredibly important developmental years, and he has kind of a unique view, therefore, as he watches them grow. But also, you heard him mention that because he was reading all these submissions for the Young Playwrights program, 700, I think you said, Jim, he was able to start really getting in the head of teenagers. And so if you think about, if you read 700 literary works a year by teenagers, that's definitely going to give you some insight in some teenagers. And so
Definitely.
leaving the theatrical piece behind, I have just found that Jim is a very well-informed thinker and advocate for youth and how we help them and take them seriously. Now, Jim and I were talking via email the other day, and this is a conversation that has happened a lot of times. I think every teacher I know has the same conversation multiple times, and that is talking about COVID and what the learning loss was. What did we lose during those years? There's been some publicity lately. We've heard about the statistics and the scores, the math and the reading scores, and some of these things were bad, but actually it was worse than we thought. And in no way do I want to minimize those, but Jim and I were talking about how there's other things, other forms of loss that we encountered during those COVID years, other learning that didn't happen. And so I asked him to come on and to talk about the little bit as we try to help parents understand perhaps what some of this loss was, and then we can hopefully find ways to help kids catch up. So why don't you share your thought with the audience, Jim?
And with COVID in particular, I felt like, well, we know it's going to be bad. I mean, it was no one was in everyone was in a certain kind of setting, for or ritual for learning that they were familiar with, and suddenly we're taking out of it for a long period of time, with so much uncertainty. But then also, as you've alluded to, I do kind of get a little tuned into more to who the student is rather than who they are as a scholar or an academic. And yeah, I've noticed too, and I think this goes across disciplines, that when kids came back, what they really were losing or missing was the familiarity with school, or even knowing how to be in school. Seventh grade was really interesting for that, because it was so different from what our students had experienced in fifth and sixth grade. And we have a split between buildings at that point. So you're talking about taking someone who had been in fifth grade, 10 years old and in fifth grade, was just getting used to how things work in that building with that particular group of people. Sixth grade was done at home, where who knows what the experience was. And now they're walking into a totally new school, 2 years older, a couple years later. It's middle school, which also has its own idiosyncrasies. Um, and I think what got lost was the sense of how do we do school, or who am I, or how do I talk to this person, who's next to me. And I've seen a lot of that in the classroom, that it's been trying to teach kids how to school, or how to have a conversation, or be aware of the fact that they're not at home, behind a screen with their camera off and Minecraft next to them, perhaps. I don't know. I know that happened a lot from what some kids have told me, but um and I don't we can get into all the, like, Maslow and whatever else, but I think if that part of a person has been missing for a year, or they haven't been able to develop that way, I don't know how much learning you're really gonna get to cover. But and I feel like people have talked about that a little bit. I don't know. I always keep hearing the learning loss and the scores and everything else. I don't really know. I don't know what's going on with that. Um, but that's, I think, and I've noticed that across the board, and I've noticed with colleagues too, and other teachers I've talked with in other places of the country, kind of catching on to the same thing, that the kids may not be all right, or they may still be recovering, and maybe we need to do a little bit more with that before we get into the subject matter.
I love that, and I think that's an important key. We have taken very complex things, personality, social interaction, someone's development, is their cognitive development, their emotional development, all these really important things, but these are all kind of under the hood, if you
Hmm.
will, in the school day. But we shut them off immediately, and then we had essentially nothing happening with these I hate the word softer skills, but these kind of personal development milestones. But this is part of what happens in school, that this is part of what
Right.
schools do, and we kind of take for granted, because this sort of thing is what is going to allow the academics to take place, that this is one of the foundations. So we shut this off immediately, and then we went back, which was good. And again, I mean, we're not second guessing the fact, it was what it was. The decisions were made for
Right.
reasons at the time, and we are not trying to relitigate all that. But the problem, I think, what you're saying is, we jumped back and we started again, and we started picking up. We could check where our curriculum maps were, and we could test for this or that, but we missed a big part of it, which is the students' souls, their development,
Yes.
their emotional well-being, their emotional maturity. And that's the part we really haven't started to reckon with or even think about yet.
Yeah. Have, it was talking to you about the specific example with my schools, and then it's a building switch. I believe you're in a school where there's a younger grade level through eighth grade. Is that right?
Right. It's
So
like pre-K through eighth. Yeah.
yeah. So did you see something similar with that, or was there maybe a little bit? Was it a little bit? I don't know if anything was easy, and I don't like using that word, but we're going to use it. Was it easier for some of your students maybe to make the transition just because they were used to the school and things like that?
I think perhaps, I think some of the transition, but I have noticed that there were certain, this is so difficult to discuss because it's not easily measurable. But I have noticed that over the years, for example, and I'm going to use a theater program just as an example, but I think this is applicable in other areas as well. It's just what I happen to know. But there were cultural things. You'd have new students join the program, and they learned things from watching the older students, and there was
Mm,
a great deal of transmitted knowledge that was never spoken.
okay.
Things that were passed down from one student to another. There were, the just all this kind of informal learning, and I always sort of assumed that was happening, but once we restarted after the pandemic, that was essentially wiped out. We'd had this, this sort of these years of institutional knowledge that one student passed to another that had really kind of just been blanked out because of the length of the pandemic, and so we didn't have the overlap we normally do. So I have noticed just the gap, the lag in training, one stage manager training another stage manager, for example,
Sure.
one watching an actor learn how to what they do not only on stage but off stage, the way that they lead a cast. These are really intangible things, but they're really critical. I'm assuming, though, the same thing is happening in other disciplines. I'm assuming the same thing is probably happening in sports or in student government. I don't know, but I hear conversations that make me think that probably has happened, but that it's just been either not a priority, or again, because it's a little hard to quantify, it's also hard to discuss.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We just again thinking after school theater program, I had a lot of similarities with ours too. That we had a very big gap, and not being able to perform, and losing some of that tradition. What was beneficial though, and it just in my case is that I was taking over the after school program from someone else, when I was just getting started. So I was doing the musical the first year, and then we had the year of kind of a little bit of chaos, and it helped the transition a little bit. So a little bit of a silver lining to that. One thing too that was interesting, and I think has helped me to work with this particular group of students, was that our opening night for the musical was the day that the school shut down.
I remember.
Um, yeah, so they, a lot of kids had left. Had a phone call from the superintendent half an hour before the end of the school day. Had to call everybody back in and tell them, hey, there's no show. Um, and at that time, I think everyone was saying, well, we'll see you in 2 weeks. But the added a bit to it was that we had to ship everything back. We had a backdrop and costumes that had to go back to the vendor. And what I saw in that moment was students who were able to not only feel that emotion of loss and sadness and confusion, but then we packed everything up and got it out in 30 minutes. And they were always very committed to helping one another and to doing whatever they could to keep the thing going. The program meant a lot, and they really carried a lot of that weight on their shoulders. That was nice for me to see, because I knew then when we come back, we can use that, and we can build off of that.
Let's talk for a minute. Let's segue to the value of arts
Mhm.
education for a moment. But I guess parents, if you're listening to this vague idea of losses from COVID that is not easily tracked, that is not easily seen, and not easily measured, but these sort of the quieter things, the social engagement, the developmental milestones. I would be curious to hear from any of you if you have noticed these things with your own children in their own activities and in their own daily life. But also, so what it's one thing to diagnose that. What do we do? How do we address it? How do we help kids come back from this? We could call it maybe social emotional, if not learning loss, but learning lack. There were times when
Yeah.
they certainly were learning lessons, but not the ones that they normally need, or at least that they would normally be learning at a certain time. So what is our role as a parent in trying to help make sure that our kids are caught back up? What is our own, I know what the math teachers are going to try to do, but it's interesting to think about as a parent. What is my plan to help my son make up some of that time as well? So that's something we're thinking about, I think.
Mhm.
And I'd love to hear from listeners if they have thoughts on that. But Jim, you and I are both pretty big arts advocates. We tend to be in the theater as our thing, but
Right.
you especially have done a lot with many, I think, different arts, and arts advocacy specifically. What are the benefits? Participating in sports is ubiquitous, and I've had kids who do it, and I think it's really good. I think there's some important things that come from it. So I certainly don't want to frame this as like a either or
Mhm.
sports versus the arts kind of thing.
Right.
But maybe people aren't quite as familiar with some of the benefits of arts education. You started to enumerate and articulate them a few minutes ago. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What might parents consider? What are some of the important things to understand?
Yeah, sure. Well, some things I've seen and then heard from students and parents is just confidence. There's and you and I mean, I think that'll probably be the first thing anyone in the theater might mention. But I've seen a lot of students who are very unsure or um, nervous, anxious, just suddenly over a period of time be able to get up and command a room, and one of the things I do talk about with middle school in particular is that I know I always tell them, I know you guys are a little, you're uncomfortable. It's just the part of your development process, and getting up in front of a group of 20 other people to tell a story is probably not at the top of the list. So we'll take the time to do it. We'll ease you into that. And what's nice is that usually by the end they're comfortable enough with each other and with themselves in that space to get up and to be expressive or be creative in front of a group of people, be vulnerable in front of a group of people. I think that that's a very big skill too, is to understand that we can maybe dig a little deeper, be more open to new ideas, whether we're generating them ourselves or hearing them from other people. Um, getting into that mode of creativity when we can be more vulnerable to the idea of it's okay, this is what I'm going to share. Some people might not like it, and that's okay. And I can take that and move on. um, so that idea of performance and reflection, which thankfully is part of our New Jersey standards for that. I think that's probably new standards across the country for arts education, or at least they're making their way there. To start to develop some of those tools. The thing that my students often will tell me, because I like to ask them, like, why are you here? What are you doing this for? What are we getting out of this? Because it's odd. It's odd to do this work. It takes up a lot of your time. You could be somewhere else at 10 o'clock at night on a tech week. What's this about? And it really is about being with other people who share similar interests or ideas or personalities, or even not. Maybe they're people who have different personalities and beliefs or ideas, but they can work together and form some kind of cohesive group. Um, and I think all of that, there's, if I had to pick something at the root, it's comfort. There's a comfort to it that allows child to um, develop their personality, or develop into who they're supposed to be or who they could be. I don't know, there are words in there I don't like to use, but I
We
think
talk
I'm kind
about
of dancing around it a little bit.
well, we talk about voice a lot.
Voice, oh great, yeah.
And I think I mean that's a very specific thing for a writer, a writer's voice.
Hmm.
I feel like you learn to develop you physically develop your voice singing or acting, but leaving that aside, the larger idea of developing your voice as a human and who you are and what you value and what you want to speak about and learning to be confident in that.
Right. Yeah, and voice, that's really the word, because that your voice is you, it's a part of you. You have to own that, even we can in a figurative way, but even how your actual voice sounds and all that kind of stuff. It's who you are. Put it out there, and let's find a way to be comfortable. I love that. Yeah, voice. That's the answer.
I sometimes tell people like, Scott, why do I have to I teach choir at different grade levels, and not
Mhm.
everyone is some of them are in there because they like that option slightly more than the other option they like less.
Yeah.
It's not
Right.
that they,
Yep. I have
but
those students too.
but I often say, look, learning how to in singing in choir, what we do is we learn how to use our voice in reference to other voices. We learn to blend and balance. We don't want you to disappear, but we also don't want you to be dominant all the time. So you're constantly being part of this larger group that's all doing something. But you're ideally, you are aware of, constantly aware of what's going on. And so there's times when you might need to be louder, and but other times when perhaps you need to be softer. And so I find that I like that idea as participation in democracy, learning how to use
Mhm.
your voice, but not to be overbearing, and always having the spotlight on you, listening to others, sometimes, based on what you hear, moderating or modifying the volume, the intensity. I think there's a lot of those kinds of things that can be translated into lots of I don't know, life lesson-y kinds of things.
Absolutely.
But it all seems to come back to, I think the one thing I love about the arts is when we talk about children doing the arts, we're usually talking about them developing themselves, the fullest range of themselves. Yes, they might be learning one skill, but really it tends to affect or impact lots of different areas: cognitive, emotional, social, behavior, spiritual. I mean, all kinds of different things with that.
Yeah. Choir is a great example of that. It's probably the ultimate collaboration, um, with the blend too. I mean, almost I feel like when it really is the most moving for me, it's almost like it's one voice of many.
Yeah, right,
Um, right?
right.
Yeah, that's and that's not easy. That's not easy to do, especially for youth. I mean, that's who still don't they're still exploring who they are and how they relate to others. So it's a great way to do that.
I remember one project you did, and this, again, kind of listeners, this is the idea of using the theater, may be specifically what we're talking about, but there's some larger implications here. Um, so Jim directed a production of Oklahoma a few years back, and
Mhm.
the reason I know about this is because he had some students, I think they were seniors, but they were basically tasked. He had, you tell the story, Jim. I'm telling the story badly, about how your publicity strategy was one thing, but then you actually
Oh,
kids. Yeah.
yeah.
Now, I think there's a really important lesson in there about teens and helping them. So will you share that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the first year, what was the first year after COVID, so it was our normal year. The year before that, we were still video recording, performing in masks, that kinda stuff. And I was trying to really keep things together, pushing things forward, keep their program out in the public, not just the public outside the school as in an audience, but in front of the students as well, so that they knew that they still had that place to go to, and that involved doing some of the marketing. And I mean, I don't know, I know some marketing tricks from when I worked at a theater company, but as far as how to um, translate that into something that students would see, I really don't know. I have been on Facebook. I can put things online. I use the app formerly known as Twitter. It's one of my favorites. But that's it. And I mean, that's not where teenagers are. And I had started to develop a YouTube page. Just because it's where we were getting a lot of information during quarantine and things, but it was, I mean, it was my YouTube. It was interesting to me, and it may have actually been my wife who told me, like, well, what do the kids think? Like, I know what you think. I want to hear from them. So I went to them and said, what do you want to know? Like, what do you want people to know? What do your friends want to know? Or if you were on the other side wondering, hey, what is this program? Or what do you do there? What would you want to tell them? And so they came up with their ideas, and I really just said to them, like, why don't you do it? Why don't you put something together and let's see what happens? Um, so they did, and I had a team of 3 students who I think spanned grade levels. I know we had a senior in there, and I think the other 2 were freshmen or sophomores, maybe. and they had a whole bunch of ideas. Can we do this? Can we do that? Can we do that? I said, yes, go for it. And only thing I think that we have to do is let me see what you put together before we put it out there. But otherwise, you feel free. And they came up with sort of a behind the scenes kind of thing. They every week for 7 weeks of our rehearsal and production schedule, they put out a new video where they talked about a certain aspect of the show and maybe interviewed a few people who were involved. They did all the editing, put it all together, and then I put it out there. And we were part of a local theater's festival, so it was a competition for performance, but they also had a special award. I think it was just like student excellence or student award, where they looked at things that aren't quite covered, and I made sure to sneak in the folder of their work, and they were nominated for it. I think there were 10 students for 5 awards, which they didn't get, but they loved the fact that it was recognized. They enjoyed going to this theater and being a part of it, and it was all them. It was all them.
I
And
think
we've been lucky that it's generated more from there. They've taken more of that on.
it's such a cliche in our field, Jim. And again, parents, I'm going to suggest that specifically a theatrical example, but there's a principle here. It is such a cliche in our field to just be constantly saying how surprised I am by what the kids did. Like,
Yes.
right. I mean, like, that is just in arts education, you hear over and over, I'm so proud of these kids. They did something I never would have thought. I never would have conceived that, or I never would have pulled it off, blah, blah, blah. These kids are amazing. And I think that's, in my mind, one of the really big blessings or benefits of being involved in the arts in some form. And maybe that's being on the stage crew. It doesn't mean you're trying to play the lead, and maybe you're doing the video, the vlogs or something instead. But the arts provide a chance for kids to surprise us, because I feel like, because of the unique structure of the arts, it seems like, I believe they generally have a little more agency. It's certainly, there's a director, a leader, a teacher, but I feel like a little more, it tends to be a bit more collaborative in many ways. And therefore it gives these kids, it provides both structure, but it also provides freedom. And
Right.
often they really take those two, sometimes we see those as being oppositional, but they take that structure and then that freedom, and then they fly with it in really remarkable ways, but that happen all the time.
Right. Well, and that's 2 things that makes me think of. One is I think a lot of times we'll look at art as almost the ultimate freedom. Like there's very little structure. It's all freedom or all expression. There was when I ran the playwriting festival many years ago, I received a very lengthy, very angry email from a high school student who did not like any of the requirements that we had about the plays, number of characters, things, page numbers. And I remember one line was, "How can you possibly expect me to be creative with all these restrictions?" And the response was simply to say, well, creativity is working within restrictions. That's the whole goal. The restrictions are there because we have things that we need to do, and this helps us maintain the program, and it gives you a challenge of working within those certain guidelines. I do think, though, that to be able to you do have a structure to to limit maybe what goes on, or a lot of different reasons to have that the structure or limitations. But you also do need to have someone in place who is able to provide that kind of freedom. So you mentioned you have a principal. I'm very lucky that the school district I'm in is very open to they want the students in these programs to have that kind of freedom to be expressive and to learn from that that experience. And I find that it's been a lot to learn to back away, to put that trust in the students, but that's when they come through the most. It's great to see, and it is surprising because you don't often get to see that happen in a math class or in an English class. There's a lot of structure involved there,
But no freedom.
but no. Well, yeah, I mean,
Or
right?
less
That's
freedom.
the cliche anyway, right?
So finding a voice, developing confidence, gaining empathy, learning to be creative while still being accountable to others. learning how to be vulnerable in front of a
Yeah.
group of people, learning how to take an idea, a thought, a vision, and give it some kind of form in some media, some kind of communication of that. These are all benefits of being engaged in arts and some kind of arts education. These are all things I think most people want their children to be able to have.
Right.
So the point isn't trying to become the best ballet dancer, best singer, best actor, best playwright. It's about the experience of being involved in these arts and what they help a child unlock and help motivate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, one of the things that drew me most to educational theater as opposed to going into any kind of performance or um, any production realm is the fact too that it does allow those things, but it's also a place where a person, a child in this case, can take a risk in a safe environment. Just if you just think about playing a character, you're getting all the life experiences from that character without very much of the you're not suffering the consequences of the risk involved, so you can still have that learning experience and then take that into your own life later. Being vulnerable in this group, if we create the safe environment for them,
Yeah.
you're going to get the same thing there too. So it's a big draw. It's a big appeal for me, and I think that that's really why um children benefit from an arts program.
So, Jim, one topic I wanted to talk with you about is it's kind of a fun piece in the New York Times. I wouldn't call it a deeply reported study, but it is kind of a fun anecdotal piece. The title is called "Grown Up Theater Kids Run the World." And now I say that, and I am a grown up theater kid, and I am very much running my own theater program, but not the world. So,
Right.
and like you, I suspect, but it mentions some prominent people who did theater in high school. For example, the governor of New Jersey, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Senator Ted Cruz, and then some other various people. I think that are a little more or less significant or well known. The Prime Minister of Canada, there's a pretty big name. But
Yeah.
it makes a point really that being in theater in your younger years leads to the acquisition of like skills and habits of mind and helps train you in ways that become um, not profitable, but provides useful skills for a variety of different pathways in life.
Sure.
I'm curious what you thought when you read that article.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't find much to disagree with, and kind of fun to see who some of these people were. I did not know that the Prime Minister of Canada had been involved in theater, let alone taught theater at high school, which is interesting. So it makes sense. Just go through it, knowing we were going to talk about it, but it mentions, many former theater kids describe a pipeline from the extracurricular activity to certain professions: journalism, radio, law, public relations, politics. Um, I think most people, especially the ones we mentioned, seem to go from law into politics. It reminds me of a story too. In my middle school class, I do get a lot of students who are dropped into the elective, who don't choose it, who don't necessarily choose to stay, even though they do. And at one particular time, covering different theater spaces, so prosceniums, thrust stage, all that kind of stuff. And this kid just flat out said, "Why do I need to know this?" Everyone's favorite question to ask. And so I stopped and said, you don't feel this is relevant to your future goals?" And he told me no. And so we explored it. So what do you want to do? He said, "Well, I want to go into law. I want to be a attorney." I said, "Okay, so let's think about how this can be used, to your advantage." He said, let alone all the acting and presenting things we're talking about, speech, body language, all that stuff. Obviously, that can connect." And he agreed. And I said, "But do you know how a courtroom is set up?" And he said, a couple other friends said, "Yeah, my dad's a lawyer, my an attorney, whatever. And we set up the classroom to look like a courtroom as they understand it. So if you're here and you have to talk to the judge but relate to the witness or whatever information you're giving, or and who the jury decides it, so they're your audience. There's a certain way this room is set up. You can make sure that the things you want the jury to know are directed to them, or that they can see it, or that they can hear it. And that's a skill that we develop actors. It's something we think about when we're creating things on stage. And I don't know that it's something that goes to the forefront of the conversation. A lot of times it's just the creativity and imagination and public speaking and all that stuff. And I don't cast that off. That's very important. But that tends to be how the performing arts, education gets looked at. Those are the things that keep our programs around in schools. But it does go much deeper, and that idea too of relating to one another, I think, is good. So it makes a lot of sense to me. Certain professions, there's always an audience involved, and different ways of relating to them. Even just journalism and radio, television, all that kind of stuff. That's the thing that really stuck out to me. What did you see in there that kind of out? Curious about that.
Well, I was struck by one of the things that I hadn't really thought of, is that in this era of Zoom meetings, for example, that people have found their theater training useful, because staring at a blank screen and maybe getting no response from your interlocutors. But
Right.
that hadn't really occurred to me. I have noticed, though, that, and I just kind of took this for granted, I have a lot of anxieties and a lot of insecurities, but I have absolutely no problem speaking in front of a large group, and that's been a really useful thing to me in my profession. It's been useful in other endeavors as well outside of my profession, and I
Sure.
sort of took that for granted. Um, and I realized that a lot of people really are scared of speaking in public, or if they're not
Yeah.
scared, that it still is a hard thing to do, and it takes a lot of energy. So I have found that it's just enormously freeing. I don't ever have to worry about that. So I wouldn't say make your kid do theater just so you'll be a good speaker, a good public speaker, but I do feel like having the ability to speak comfortably in front of people um, is a really useful skill, and that's translated to job
Sure.
interviews and all kinds of other things. But I think even more importantly for me, and maybe this is because of what I do, but the piece talks a little bit about this, but oftentimes by participating in theater, and I'd be interested to hear from a playwright's perspective as well, we
Mhm.
become able to be empathetic, because acting
Yeah.
is learning to inhabit another person for a little while, and understanding what they want, what they're trying to do, understanding why they are the way they are, and then being able to credibly present this to an audience requires deep empathy. Likewise, you have to be empathetic to the other actors during the course of the play. I mean, on stage, but
Right.
I believe that empathy translates off stage. And I think learning how to think like another person, or at least learning how another person thinks, and really being
Mhm.
able to live with that for a while, I think that's a pretty helpful skill when it comes to a whole array of relationships in general in life.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I would tie into that what you just too. There's another spot where it references a study of New York City school children by the New Victory Theater, where just students who participated were more creative and hopeful than peers who did not. And I think the idea of hopeful, um,
Yes.
I would goes hand in hand with empathy, right? It's there's it's easy to be fatalistic, I think, with a lot that goes on in the world, but having that hope, and then I think the empathy ties into it. The more we understand others, and um, or at least can be open to understanding or considering others' motives and opinions and things like we would with characters. I think that is very powerful. Um, It's I forget. I'm thinking of it. There's an actor, I don't know who it is, who once said that for them, playing the villains is always the most interesting because they have to find the humanity, inside them. There's a reason why they're doing that. Um, I just been on a big Stephen Sondheim, Oscar Hammerstein kick, as far as how the two of them connect and the mentorship between the two. There was an interview that was being done with Stephen Sondheim, and he was talking about the first questions he asks as a lyric writer is the basic questions we ask as an actor: who is this person? What do they want? What are they willing to do to get there? What are the circumstances that are around them? Basic play building, basic character analysis. And I think when we're able to stop and think of those things, I found that I've done. There are people who I don't. Why in the world is this person doing this or saying this? There've certainly been times, just things that are going in the
Hi
world or
everyone,
things that
this
go
is
on in a
Braden.
school or in the
I'm so
classroom
happy
where
to
I need to
welcome you
stop
to
a minute and
today's
say that. It
episode.
makes me a
I just want to
better
note
teacher.
that
I hope it makes me
partway
a better
through
person.
there were some
Having
minor
that kind of
technical
empathy. I love that.
difficulties.
So I love that you
There's
said
a
that.
little bit of crackling with the
You know,
guest's
one of the
mic
you triggered this thought
sent
when you
him in and out
mentioned
for a little bit,
the
but I promise you
Sondheim
it will not last very
Hammerstein
long.
connection.
So I
For
hope
those
you can
listening
stick
who
with
may
it.
not know,
Thank you so much.
Oscar Hammerstein, who was the lyricist behind Oklahoma, The Sound of Music, The King and I, South Pacific, several other kind of real big, kind of mid 20th century plays, was the mentor and the teacher. I can't talk, for the famous more recent composer Stephen Sondheim, who died not long ago, who was a much who brought theater into kind of a new era and had a much different approach and a much I don't know, edgier content and things like that. But it's an interesting bit of continuity because you wouldn't normally match their, if you just saw their work, you wouldn't really see that there was a connection. But Hammerstein mentored Sondheim, almost was a second father to him, really, in some ways.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and the reason I get drawn to that too, just for providing the context, is studying young playwrights' work. Stephen Sondheim had founded Young Playwrights program in the United States in the early '80s. He never says, but I think it's largely in part to the mentorship he received from Hammerstein, and not only the direct connection between the two of them and the parallels between the development of musical theater, but the influence that then Stephen Sondheim had mentoring people directly or opening up, these young playwrights programs. It's really been. I think we owe a lot of what modern theater is today to that connection, that mentorship going back. So that's what's in my mind right now. Do a lot of research on that right now.
you have been doing a lot lately. It occurs to me that theater is really a phenomenal system of mentorship as I think about it.
Yeah.
I don't think I think what occurs to me is I don't think, while it was kind of a special relationship those two had, theater is kind of set up in a way that it almost inherently will create systems of mentorship. There's so much to be done during a play, for example, that almost anyone who wants to do more and get involved in some way can. There's so much work to go around. There's also lots of entry level things you can do. Um, for me, one of the most transformative relationships of my life was my high school theater teacher, who was wise enough not to cast me in the lead that I really wanted, because there was someone better, but opened up to me and allowed me to be her assistant director. And so I learned how to design scenery. She taught me, we spent hours painting scenery together. She taught me how to create, this was back in the days when you still made flats out of muslin and wood and put glue on it to make the muslin tight. We spent hours going to local theaters and renting costumes. She had me choreograph and work with some of the vocals, especially we were doing Guys and Dolls, some of the male vocals in that. That was a transformative experience to me, and I literally draw on that every day pretty much in my professional life now. But more than
Yeah.
the specific theater skills, though, while we were working together, we were talking, and she was teaching me about life, and there's a lot of things she opened up to me. One of the
Yeah.
most enjoyable and meaningful jobs I do, I feel like now, is mentoring. Um, and there's always someone who they just sort of stand out. They're there at every rehearsal, even if they don't have to be, and they want to do stuff. They want to be there, they want to be in it. And I have found that theater really opens itself well to that. Again, partly because there's a lot of entry level positions available, so you don't have to know much to start with. I don't know if you have a
Right.
response to that or if you've seen anything like that.
Well, I think, my entry into theater is very much the same. I had a high school, theater teacher who was very important to me, and still remains that way. I've had it at every level, and we share a mentor too in graduate school. That
Mm.
and it does, and what really has been um eye-opening for me, and I think the most important part of the work for me, teaching middle school and high school more than anything else, is to provide an environment where um, students can I'm trying to think of how to say this, but I have a couple of students who have discovered talents in themselves, through art, not necessarily through theater art. One in particular who is really deeply involved in visual art, and I just recently, we were trying to figure out our merchandise for the theater group, like what was the swag going to be, and she came up with a couple designs. I said, I had no clue that you did any kind of fashion design or could draw that way, and it became a conversation, and she's designing costumes for our season this year.
Oh, wonderful.
So and having that kind of opportunity to step into that role and learn in the environment, and then we're talking back and forth. I'm obviously treating her like a junior in high school, but who's doing this for the first time, but also discussing with her some my feedback, why I don't like we're gonna produce the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So, and I have a very very big aversion to humans and animal costumes. Like we can I just I don't know, there's something about it, like I don't cats is really difficult for me, so and not just because I can't do it. So discussing a lot of the animal characters in Narnia, I explained to her, like, I just can't see it. I don't think an audience really connects with it. I think it plays against their imagination. So discussing with her just kind of how I approach it, and she would do the designs, we would talk about them, I would critique them, give her the feedback, and we go back and forth. And I just think that collaboration and that kind of mentorship is a opportunity that where else you get that, especially as a teenager, in the classroom. And like you said, it's the art form itself. There's so many different elements that go into a production. You have to work with other people. And to that, I think a great example, I just took we just took a trip into New York earlier this week, and my wife took our daughter one place, and I took my two boys to the Museum of Broadway, which had just opened earlier this year. And not only was it great to nerd out on all the theater history that you go through, but the final display is you go through a stage door and go down steps like you're going into backstage. Takes you through all the different elements of production, and just to
Wow.
see the different steps of it, and the people who talk on the screens are talking about the way they collaborate with each other. And the very last thing you see before you leave the museum is a kind of an animated time of how a show gets produced, and the arrows connecting all the different parts are just going everywhere. So it's a great visual example, with a lot of quotes that talk directly to that idea of, I have to talk to this person or meet with this person, or I work with this person. And I think it is very easy, for someone who's new to the experience, like a student, to walk in and say, I think this looks interesting, can you show me how to do it? You're doing the work too, so they can just step right in and do it right there with you.
I love what you said, that this is one of the there's not that many paths to mentorship available in high school,
Yeah.
or in my case, even middle school, but this is really one of them. I one of the things I don't know what the right word is, I enjoy most or am proudest of is that and I don't think I'm that unique in this. I'm not bragging about me. This is something that I think a lot of people do. But when the show starts, I've got these big productions with 150, 200 kids in it. And once that show starts, it's all the kids. There's a stage manager backstage who is a middle school child who is calling all the cues, when the lights come on, when this special effect happens. Um, eh, those lights then are turned on by other students on the light board and the sound board. Um, so it's not just acting, there's someone backstage organizing this. There's always someone who's
Yeah.
really pretty good at dance, and inevitably someone will come up to me and say, "Hey, I have an idea for the choreography. Could we do this, and this?" So it's kind of like a mentorship machine almost, with
Yeah.
all these really great opportunities. And there might be other things or places in high school where that can happen, but I can't think of many where you can become really one of the crew. I rely on my choreographers and stage managers really like they're part of the adult staff, in terms of they're
Right.
really doing like genuine real work, in the sense that no one else is doing it for them, and if they don't do it, it won't get done. So they
Yeah.
have real responsibility. And that is a pretty magical thing, I think, that just happens. Socially, I think too. I This is a bit
Yes.
that we could, there's going to be exceptions, but I think on the whole, theater kids tend to be pretty accepting of a wide range of personalities. Um, you can be probably accepted pretty well in the theater, no matter who you are and what you like to do, even if you're a little quirky, or even if you're not that quirky.
Right.
But it seems like a place where a lot of different types of people can work together pretty comfortably.
Yeah, and I also find it, from my own experience, but even especially with teenagers, that if there isn't a level of acceptance, it's a ready platform or a ready environment to discuss it.
Right.
Certainly have mediated a few of those, recently, and it's interesting to walk with those kids through that kind of process. I don't want to use the word conflict, but it gets mediated pretty well, with students who've had that kind of opportunity. And I also try to, when I'm working with the middle school students in particular, but high school as well, to remind them that we're not just up here performing and being expressive and all of that for ourselves. It's certainly part of it, but there's an audience that also needs to see it. So that idea too, that we're communicating back and forth with this living, breathing group of individuals, who are all going to see what we're doing in their own different through their own different lens and with their own experiences and everything else. I think that realization, lends itself very well to that kind of a social interaction.
I
And I
like
don't know where else you get that.
you just triggered another thought. The idea of being accountable to the audience is something I talk about
Yes.
frequently with my students. Um, a lot of time, on opening night, I have a fairly standard speech. Um, and part of it is to say, okay, it's been fun, we've worked hard, but really now it's not about us. For the next
Yeah.
2 hours, we have a responsibility to the audience. They're the only reason we're here. And so we are obligated ethically to give them the best show we possibly can. So
Right.
we're going to work hard to not be giddy and silly. We don't want to make sloppy mistakes. We've got to give the audience what they're expecting. And it's when I give that speech, it's interesting. I start to see eyes. Some people have heard this speech several times by the time they graduate, which is the point. Like, it sticks.
Yeah.
But I will sometimes see someone just kind of like, that look they get when they've thought about something for the first time, because of course in
Yeah.
middle school kids are egocentric. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how they
Right.
are. But I do think theater helps pull us out of that. It can help us think about being responsible to other people and accountable to other people. We're not
Yeah.
just out there being, kind of the contrary of the stereotype. It's not just about being a diva, basically.
Yeah, right. And I think divas have a hard time, really working within that environment. So if when you can establish a program that is accepting and works that way and has that as its goal, you tend to. We don't get a lot of divas. I don't tend to get a lot of them because we're working together to do things that way. I'm sure you have the similar approach. What I also like to do about with the accountability is the fact that there's I'll call it a due date because we are talking about school too. Every assignment does have a due date, but with this, like you said, there's an audience and they're expecting something, and we have to have all of these different elements complete to give them what they're expecting. But then what's also fun is at the same time it is what it is. It's if we weren't able to do something or get something we wanted. I mean, that always happens. There's a way we want to make. I'm sure we just did Adam's Family last year. I'm sure there were technical things we wanted to do that we just couldn't. So we did the best that we could, and that was okay. It didn't doesn't detract from what you're doing. It just becomes part of what it is, and learning how to accept that we've done the best we can with what we have at this particular moment for these certain people is a moment too where I find a lot of students have that moment of they understand. Okay, all right, great. So let's go put on a show, and they survive it and everything's okay, and we do it again.
Someone even mentioned that in that New York Times piece. Actually, you just reminded me of that. The ability to roll with things when things go wrong.
Yeah,
And there's two ways. I mean, you're talking about something that we tried to do, and I always joke that, what the play looks like in my head in August and what it really looks like, what it really is in October are very different things. But
right.
so there's the things we would have done if we could, but whatever, time, money, skill, whatever, we couldn't. But then also the fact that inevitably, because all of these pieces are working together, all of the stuff you mentioned a few minutes ago are all working together, there's so
Right.
many chances for things to go wrong. And inevitably, during a performance, all kinds of stuff goes wrong. Maybe it's seen by the audience, often it's not, but you really have to roll with it. What happens
Yeah.
when your microphone falls off of your waistband and suddenly I've seen so many kids
Yes.
handle handle beautifully. We were doing the Wizard of Oz once, and the lion's microphone fell down, but because it was like a onesie. Sorry, it was a lot. It was a person in an animal costume, Jim. But
That's okay. It's sometimes you have to do it.
it fell down into his paw, like the paw where his foot was. And I remember just thinking, "Oh no!" And just watching him, he didn't even he didn't even break a sweat. He just started kind of improvising. I think he pretended someone had stepped on his toe, or he was scared of something. I forget the details, but he reached down in, and the fun part was that the audience saw what had happened, and so they
Yeah.
were completely with him. And so it was when he finally got it fixed, everyone started cheering. Um,
Right. Yeah.
that ability to work through problems in good humor and not letting it throw you, I think is pretty potent stuff too for a kid.
Absolutely. Well, and that's great too that story ends with the applause, because I think that well, I know that um teenagers don't. That's not what they're expecting to happen. Often, oftentimes that is. The audience, they're with you. And one of the things I love to do in middle school is when a new class comes in, the first performance project they do is a one slide presentation about themselves, because I tell them like you've done a presentation before, you know who you are, so we get all that out of the way. But then I don't give them a lot of info about how the presentation is going to go or time to even practice it. Part that is that to emphasize that like they need to practice on their own, but also so that when they get up and they're not quite sure how to work my computer, which is actually set up backward, so when the desk screen transfers to the projection screen, it's projection screen to the left, desktop to the right, but the way they're linked is backwards. So they have to kind of fiddle around and it doesn't quite work, but then they're helping each other out with that. We're laughing about it. We make jokes about it. People applaud when it works. It's the same kind of thing. And in the end, I'm able to tell them, you got up here, you did all the things that you were frightened about, and things went wrong, and you still survived, and you're okay. So the next time, it's gonna you're gonna know that, and it's gonna feel a little bit different, and feel a little bit easier for you. And nothing's gonna go the way you plan it. in life. So it's a great thing to practice at 12, 13.
It really is. It really is. So I don't want to just be, I don't know what the right word is, biased, because theater is what I do. It's what you
Mhm.
do. But I guess if people are listening, I hope you can maybe see that there's so many different opportunities for people. There's a lot of ways to participate in theater. A lot of benefits for kids doing it. I always tell people, like, if their child is having a hard time socially, like, try to
Yes.
find the theater people, and then they'll say, "Oh, but he doesn't ever want to act, or she doesn't like to be on stage." I'm like, "That's fine. See if they need help running the lights. See if there's always something backstage. They need someone help with props and costumes." There's so many things to do and so many ways to be involved, and it is such a all hands on deck thing that it really I do think there's a lot of opening for people. So
Absolutely.
that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you about this is, of course, as theater people, we value theater inherently, intrinsically, but it can be a really powerful vehicle for a lot of wonderful things, not least the intense social connections that happen during
Yes.
a performance, during a class or something like that. And I think that's another really powerful thing. It's those bonds become just so tight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it's these are examples too. I know back to school night or opening day of a class, for middle school in particular, I'll often tell students and parents, even though theater is the title, it's real, and we will learn theater in this room. It's really not the goal of this class. The goal is all the things you just mentioned. The connections and we could come up with a list. I think we've talked about a lot of that through our conversation too.
Sort of like, I guess we could say maybe theater is the infrastructure of, or the superstructure, the scaffold upon which all these other things hang, these other benefits. We,
Yeah,
we know most of these kids are not going to go on to become professional performers. Maybe some of them will do something, in college, or um, in my case, high school, or in community theaters. But yeah, it's
right.
about relationships, the mentorship, the confidence, the learning to roll with things, being able to face a crisis and go on, being accountable to others for the things you say. There's just so many of these other things.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, one of the other things that I enjoyed
Mhm.
about that article was just hearing all the parts everyone had been. Um, uh, I think
Yeah.
I'm trying to, I don't remember all of them, but so I believe I know one of your favorite parts, but I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. You played Elwood P. Dowd, and it wasn't actually in high school. I think it was in college. Is that right?
Yes. No. Yeah. I did. I played Elwood in college. Yeah. It was the last role I think I played in college.
That's wonderful. So my favorite was I played Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, and
Yeah.
that was the just the role of a lifetime. It was so much fun, and I still treasure that memory. So listeners, if you're out there, I would love to hear from you. If you did high school theater or middle school theater, if you did theater of any kind, tell me what roles you played, and I'd love to hear if you any lessons that you remembered, or things that you appreciate, or things you realize it was beneficial. I do think we live in kind of a wonderful time. When I was a kid, there just wasn't a whole lot of theater around. I mean,
Right.
outside of um, schools, but I feel like just almost everywhere I've lived since then has had. I feel like the birth of like community theater groups. There's been just they've multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. There's so many more opportunities for young and old alike, which I think is really wonderful
Absolutely.
that there ever were when I was a kid. So anyway, listeners, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what your favorite theater experiences were, if you've had them, or if you saw your child have them. Um, I think I'll just close on this note. One of the things I've kept over the years, Jim, we did Aladdin, and I had a student who was really talented kid, and she came up to me and she said, "Would you consider letting the genie be a girl?" And no, and I didn't. So the reason I know this is her mom is a actually really good talented, high profile author who wrote this up for my benefit after the fact. So I remember, but apparently my response to her was, I think the question is, can this girl be the genie? And that
Right.
apparently motivated her, and she nailed this part. But on closing night, the parent of this student sent me a picture that she'd posted on Instagram. It was of her child soaring, 20 feet above the stage. She was flying at the phenomenal Friend Like Me. And she had just put a little caption on it that said, "My child is flying." Um, at the end, she wrote me this lovely note about how this production had given her wings, and theater program had given her wings and helped her fly. So I keep that image with me, and I always look at it after really bad rehearsals or depressing moments or whatever. So if you want your child to find their wings and soar, I think you could probably do a lot worse than looking around for a theatrical opportunity on or off stage, in the lights or backstage helping the magic happen. So
Absolutely. I love that. That's a great story.
Well, Dr. James DeVivo, thank you for carving some time out with me today.
It's always a pleasure.
Wonderful to see you again after these years. And appreciate all the good work you're doing and the wonderful things you do for kids always.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it's great to see you again. I always love being able to talk to you, but I really, very pleased to be able to talk to you in this forum. Thank you.
In the words of our late mentor, indeed.
Indeed.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode. I hope that some of this has sparked some thoughts about ways you can help your child develop as a person. We are talking about arts education as one way to do that, but the goal, of course, is helping our children maximize their development and their ability to more fully be themselves in every context and in every place. Thanks again for tuning in. And if I can ask a favor, I would love and appreciate any ratings you can give on the Apple podcast app, especially, but on wherever you get your podcasts, if you can take a moment, leave a rating, hopefully a glowing one. But appreciate your time and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all later. Until then, happy parenting. You've got this.